All right, so today we're still working with parallel lines and angle pairs, except now we're going to be given those lines are parallel with that transversal, so we can describe our angle pairs a little bit better. Okay, so what it looks like here is if I have, I'm just going to draw in some parallel lines. Doesn't matter which line you draw them on. Okay, so these two lines here are parallel. And we have a transversal that cuts through those two lines. Okay, like we said yesterday, that means there are 8 angles that are created. Okay, so I have angle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so you have those 8 angles created. Now, since these lines are parallel, we can talk about their congruency or if they are supplementary. Okay, so that's what we're going to do down here. So if we have parallel lines, then your corresponding angles, which we abbreviated as CA, are going to be congruent. Okay, so if you see corresponding angles with parallel lines, those angles are congruent. To use this in a proof, yes, you will use this in a proof. You say if parallel, then corresponding angles are congruent. So you use this if you are given parallel lines. So if your proof says you are given A is parallel to B, okay, that is when you're going to be looking for congruent angles. Okay, and then you would use if parallel, then corresponding angles are congruent. Just as a reminder, which angles are corresponding? Okay, one type of corresponding angle here would be angle 1 and angle 5. Okay, so that's your example of corresponding angles. Those two angles are going to be congruent to each other. Okay, next we have alternate interior angles. That is AIA. Okay, and your alternate interior angles are also congruent if your lines are parallel. So we would say if parallel, then alternate interior angles are congruent. And again, an example of alternate interior angles up top here. Those are both interior and they have to go over the top of that transversal. So 4 and 5 or 3 and 6. Okay, so that's an example of an alternate interior angle. And those are congruent to each other since those lines are parallel. Okay, next one is alternate exterior angles, which is abbreviated E or AEA. Okay, those are also congruent. So in a proof, we would say if parallel, then alternate exterior angles are congruent. Okay, an example of that angle pair up at the top here would be what? Alternate exterior angles. What is one example of that? 1 and 8. Okay, they are on the exterior of your parallel lines and they go across that transversal. Okay, the last angle pair we have are consecutive interior angles, abbreviated CIA. Those angles are not congruent. They are supplementary. Okay, so those angles are supplementary, meaning they are going to add to 180. Okay, so in our proof, we would write if parallel, then consecutive interior angles are supplementary. Okay, so again, that adds to 180. An example of that at the top, given our parallel lines here, we need both interior angles and they have to be on the same side of the transversal. Okay, so an example of that would be angle 3 and angle 5. Okay, so both interior and on the same side of that transversal. Another example would be 4 and 6. Okay, so those angles are supplementary, and you can even see in the picture itself, those two angles do not even look congruent. Okay, so those ones have to be supplementary there. Questions so far? All right, these next 4 questions, I want you to answer with the person sitting next to you. So talk to the person sitting next to you. Answer those 4 questions.
So I would say it's only when it only really does the answer problem. Well, because if you think about it, like if the other lines are going like this, and if they're going to come with them eventually, and then it goes like that, like that's transversal, like they're going to be different lengths. Oh, yeah. So when like it's something like this,
All right, what's the answer for all of these? I heard a lot of people say it.
only if the lines are parallel.
Only if the lines are parallel. So this would be no. Okay, it's not always congruent. Okay, this is only true only if your lines are parallel. Okay, so only true if your lines are parallel. So remember when we talked about this yesterday, we had 2 lines. Okay, they could intersect. We weren't given that they were parallel. You still have a transversal that cuts through those lines. Okay, and you can still identify your angle pairs. Okay, so if I have this angle and this angle, those 2 angles aren't congruent just because they're alternate exterior. Your lines have to be parallel in order for them to be congruent to each other. Questions on that? Most of you got that. All right, so we're going to use these different angle pairs to find the measure of each of these numbered angles here at the bottom. So we have that the measure of angle 11 is 62. Okay, so I'm going to write 62 by angle 11 so I know what the measure is. I also know the measure of angle 14 is 38. That is all I need to know to find the rest of these angle measures. Okay, I know that these lines right here are parallel to each other. So I can use that and the chart above to identify angle pairs and say which ones are congruent and which ones are supplementary. So to start you off here, what do I know about angle 11 and angle 8? What type of angle pair is that?
Vertical.
They are vertical angles. What do you know about vertical angles? They're congruent. So that means angle 8 is also 62. Okay, and we can start writing them down over here too if you get too crowded. So we knew 11 was 62. We now know 8 is 62. And we knew 14 was 38. Okay, what about 7 and 11? What type of angle pair is that? 7 and 11. They're a linear pair. Okay, a linear pair is supplementary, so they have to add to 180. So to get angle 7, you just need to take 180 minus 62. Okay? What am I looking for? 7 is 118. So if I know angle 7, what other angle do I know now? 12. Okay, 7 and 12 are vertical angles. So 12 is also 118. Now I'm going to do one using my parallel lines. Thank you. Okay, so here are my parallel lines, right? What do I know, or what type of angle pair then is 4 and 11? They're corresponding angles. What do we know about corresponding angles from above? They're congruent, meaning 4 has to be 62 degrees. Okay, so you have to look for those different angle pairs. I want you to find the rest of those angle measures.
I have a question. So for like this, because it's a triangle, so those will equal 180?
All three?
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know.
You don't need to know that to answer this question, but you can.
I mean, but then you can still find 5.
Yes.
And then find 13, just the supplement, 238.
Oh, yeah. Same with the one as well.
Then 180 minus 38 is 140. No,
The 142.
142. So you find, angle 10 is 142, and then angle,
Oh, we already.
so 13 and 10 is 140. And then so you can also add angle 4 and 6. So 4 and 6 are, oh wait, I don't know, 6 is 30. And then you add those together and subtract that number.
It's an earring,
Yeah.
but I
So
can't get it in my hair. So
That's 100. So 5.
you just.
So 5 is 8.
I only
2
want
is
to
also.
I can't see what I'm
And
doing.
then 4 is 62, 3 is 63.
Yeah.
And then
I know.
6 is 30.
All right, so most people were done or finishing up. So I want to keep going so that I can give you some time to work on your assignment. So finding the rest of these angles here, Below, for 9, 10, and 13, I can do the same thing I did with 7, 8, 11, and 12. So you do have vertical angles here, so 9 is also 38. Okay, then I can subtract 38 from 180 to get 10 and 13. So 10 is 142, and 13 is 142, since those are vertical. Then, looking at my parallel lines here, okay, 6 and 14 are going to be congruent because they are corresponding. So angle 6 is 38 as well. Okay, then I have vertical angles up here, so 4 and 3 are congruent and 6 and 1 are congruent. Okay, so 1 is 38 and 3 is 62. Okay, then to find 2 and 5 here, I know these 3 angles right here have to add to 180 because they make a straight line. So I can take 180 minus 62 minus 38 to get angle 5, which is 80. Okay, then angle 2 and angle 5 are vertical, so angle 2 also has to be 80. Okay, so just looking for those angle pairs. Questions? All right, on the back, again, we're looking for angle pairs, except this time we're going to set up an equation and then solve for a variable. Okay, so in number 6, I am given that these two lines here are parallel. That's what those arrows in the lines indicate. Okay, that means that this other line that intersects them is your transversal. Okay, so that is your transversal right there. So I'm going to look for different angle pairs to set up an equation and solve. Well, what I notice right away is that this y and this 114 make an angle pair. Which angle pair do they make? Y and 114. They're corresponding. What do you know about corresponding angles if your lines are parallel? They're congruent. That means y is going to equal 114. Okay, so if y is 114 and I have x plus 12 over here, those two together have to make a straight line. And what is a straight line? 180. So I can add those together and set them equal to 180. So x plus 12 plus 114 equals 180. Okay, so I have x plus 126 equals 180. Just combining those two numbers. Subtract 126 from both sides. To get x is 54. Okay, so still just looking for those angle pairs. You can still look for those angles that create a straight line. You can still look for vertical angles to know that they are congruent. Okay, using any of that knowledge we've gone over before. So we're going to do another example here. Number 7. So these two segments here that have your arrows in them, those are your parallel lines. Okay, so those are your parallel lines. So I have two different transversals here. Okay, I have one right here. Okay, and I have another one over here. Okay, so those are two different transversals. So just looking at the pink one that I had right here, looking at the angles created by that transversal, what type of angle pair is that? both on the inside of those parallel lines and going over the top. They're alternate interior angles. Okay, so alternate interior angles are congruent when your lines are parallel. So that means I can set those two measures equal to each other. Okay, so we have 2x is equal to 108. Just divide by 2. Get x is 54. Okay, then looking at this yellow transversal, I have more angles that are created. Both are on the interior and on the same side of the transversal. Okay, what type of angle pair is that? If you look at the front with our examples, what type of angle pair are both on the interior and on the same side? Consecutive interior angles. Okay, those are the CIA ones. What do you know about those angles if your lines are parallel? They're supplementary, meaning I have to add those two angles together and set them equal to 180. Okay, so I can subtract 120 here. And then divide by 5. To get y is 12. Okay, questions on those two? All right, I want you to do number 8. Identify which lines are parallel and find that transversal. Okay, your lines that are parallel are going kind of up this time. They're not side to side here. All right. So in number 8, your lines that are parallel are these ones right here with the arrows going through it. Okay, so looking for the first transversal, I'm going to use this one. Doesn't matter which one you use first. Okay, I'm going to use that one as my first transversal. So then, if this is hard to look at, what I suggest is turning your paper sideways. Okay, so these lines are your parallel lines. Okay, and this is your transversal. So I have my 2 angles right here created by that transversal. They're both on the same side of that transversal and on the interior of your parallel lines. So those are consecutive interior angles. Okay, meaning those 2 have to add to be 180. Okay, so I can take 96 plus 2x and set it equal to 180. And you should get x is 42. Okay, same thing with your second transversal here. That one is at the bottom. Okay, and you do have an angle pair formed with that transversal as well. Okay, so again, turn it sideways if you can't see it. Okay, I have an angle here and an angle here. They're on the same side of that transversal and in between your parallel lines. So again, these are consecutive interior angles, so they have to add to be 180. Okay, so those have to add to be 180. Here, y is 14. Questions? All right, last one, number 10. I'm going to skip number 9. If you did number 9 and want to know the answer, x is 60, y is 10. So at number 10, I want you to talk to the person next to you. Read through it, look at your picture, talk to the person next to you, and then we'll go through it.
I said that the relationship is like a perpendicular and one and two are supplementary just because A is all lines. So and if C is a transversal, so like they're on both sides of the line, so that equal one change. And if they're congruent, that means 180 has to be divided into 2, which is 90. So
Is it just because they're perpendicular?
that's just yeah, and then like that inherit right.
Yeah, I mean, I said All right, so with this one, you are given that A and B are parallel. Okay? Those are parallel lines, and you're also given angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Okay, since angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, those have to be 90. Okay, since they create a straight line. Okay, so those have to be 90 degrees. So since these lines are parallel, that means angle 1 is congruent to angle 5 because they are corresponding angles. And angle 2 is congruent to angle 6, so they are corresponding angles. Okay, since those two angles are 90, that means line C and line B would have to be perpendicular. Okay? So I have since angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, and they form a linear pair. Measure of angle 1 is equal to the measure of angle 2, which has to be 90. And since A is parallel to B, angle 1 is congruent to angle 5 because they are corresponding. And angle 2 is congruent to angle 6. Again, they are corresponding. So the measure of angle 5 is the same as the measure of angle 6, which is 90. Okay, therefore, line B would be perpendicular to line C. And that is somewhat of a proof. Kind of. Okay, questions on that? Did you realize they were perpendicular at least? Yes?